Hello and welcome everybody to another puzzle challenge video with chessuniversity.com. This is Ryan Murphy, and as usual I'm going to start by reviewing yesterday's puzzle, going over the solution with you guys, and then proceeding to our new puzzle since it's the beginning of the week. The new puzzle will be more for newer players who are getting into chess, learning some fundamental tactical patterns. I would say the audience it's intended for is around, I don't know, let's say brand new to like 1,000 rated. So this is yesterday's puzzle. This was the hardest of the previous week, and here it's white to play and win. It's more like you have to find the first couple of moves, and then it's more of a concept that you have to see, because there's a couple different ways it could shake out. But yeah, if you haven't solved it already, take a moment now to pause the video and see if you can figure out how white forces a win here. So I'll give you guys a moment to pause, and then I'll continue going over the solution. Okay. Well, the first move, which is essential to see, is to start with f6. And really there are two main options for black here. They can either retreat the queen to d8 or to e5. Both are definitely winning for white, though they're a little bit different. And I should point out that taking on f6, trying to sack the bishop, doesn't actually provide any relief at all to black, because simply after pawn takes, it's the same exact problem because the rook protects the f6 pawn. So the same motifs that you're going to see in a second are going to be available. So it's really between queen e5 and queen d8. Let's start with queen e5. One nice benefit from the black perspective about queen e5 is this bishop cannot move to g7, which we'll see in a moment is important in a lot of cases, because it hangs the g5 pawn. So the queen attacking g5 is a bit relevant here. Now, white's going to take on g6 with the h-pawn, trying to open the h-file anyway. And now here, there's a couple of moves that are very strong for white in this position, but the one that's for sure winning, and I think the strongest, and it highlights a key element of this position, is queen f3. This is going to be true in the queen d8 lines as well, that it's very important for white to keep control over this f4 square to prevent any knight f4 checks, giving black counterplay against white's king. So queen f3 is a very important move to start with. And then in the near future, white is looking to play bishop g7, and then rook h1, and then rook h8 checkmate. And this proves to be very difficult to actually prevent. And it's the reason that white's winning. So yeah, just to point out, you do need to start with queen f3. You can't start with a move like bishop g7 directly, because as I said, that would blunder g5, and then the whole thing kind of falls apart because this pawn is now actually under some pressure. Now rook h1 can't be played, so yeah, that's important to spot. So queen f3 is a very, very nice move there. So as long as you see that, and then the idea of rook h1 and bishop g7 and rook h8 mate, that's good. And same thing goes for queen d8. Here we're going to go hg, hg. I should point out that fg is never possible because of f7, and you win the rook. So hg, hg. And here, in the game, bishop g7 was actually played directly, which is a pretty big mistake because it allows black this nice resource of playing queen to c8 and then trying to come into h3, for example. And then to white's credit in the game, they found the best move here, which is to play the really beautiful move knight to f5, interfering with the diagonal and trying to insist on this idea of getting the rook to h8 as quickly as possible. The game continued, bishop takes f5, rook takes f5, and now after g takes f5, black was mated by rook h1, and rook f8 was, or sorry, rook h8 was unstoppable. But here, black had one final resource that would have at least kept him in the game, which was queen takes f5. And the simple point that if white tries to take this queen, black goes knight f4 and then takes on e2. So for example, here, takes, and it's important here that a move such as rook h1 is not working, because rook h1 threatening rook h8 mate is a very serious thing, but luckily for black they're in time with their checks. Rook e3 check, if king goes to g4, then take with check, and then if takes, then there's knight g3, and if the king goes the other way to g2, then it's knight f4 check, king f1, rook f3 check, king e1, and now rook e8 check, and eventually you can block on the h-file. You can put something on h3 to prevent mate. That's very tricky. It would have actually made a good puzzle on its own. How does black survive if white goes for this direct mate. But in any case, this actually isn't the way for white to win after the queen retreats. So bishop g7 is not correct in this moment. After you take on g6, it's very, very important to first play a move that deals with the f4 threat. So rook f3 is the best. And the point is simply now you're going to use the a1 rook in conjunction with bishop g7 to deliver mate, and the rook on the f file still covers the knight f4 check. So for example, they could play this move. We don't care. If takes, simply takes, and now rook h1 is pretty unstoppable. There's really nothing that can be done about the mating net, so white wins, just for example. All right, I spent a lot of time on this one because it's important to see all these like little details and defensive ideas, and also because the new puzzle is not too involved, so it won't take us too long to go through it. So now we can jump forward and see our new puzzle for the day. Let me actually jump to the critical moment, which is here. And it's going to be black to play and win. So if you want reward points on your chessuniversity.com account, check the link in the description to this YouTube video. It'll take you to the official post where you can write your answer, and if you get the answer right before we post the solution, you can get those reward points on your account. So if that sounds interesting, check out the description. Otherwise, I'm going to show how we reach this position. This was played on live chess on chess.com. Actually played by one of my students, so this is a 1000 against an 1100 on chess.com in game in 30. And the game began as a symmetrical king's pawn opening. White playing the move d3, which isn't the best because it blocks in the bishop, but it's also not terrible. It's just that black's supposed to be very comfortable after d3. There's not a lot of pressure against black's position here. Knight f6 was played, knight c3, and now g6, kind of a slower development for this bishop than the traditional bishop c5 or bishop b4. But because white has opted for a very slow development by putting the pawn on d3 and having the bishop more passive inside the pawn chain, you can get away with stuff like this. Nothing terrible is going to befall black. White plays knight d5. This breaks an opening principle because white's moving the same piece twice in the opening, and also allowing black to capture and double the pawns. So that's also going to help black. So takes, d6, c4, another pawn move. So we'll notice that neither side has any minor pieces out at the moment because they've traded their only developed pieces. But white's made a lot of pawn moves in the opening, and they've made a lot of repeated moves, right? So they're going to be falling behind in development pretty quickly. Bishop g7 was played, knight to f3, bishop g4, pinning the knight to the queen. Bishop to e2, breaking the pin and preparing to castle. Knight d7, developing a minor piece, castles, and queen e7. Queen e7, not a necessary move, doesn't really enhance any of the previous threats. I think black should have just castled kingside, but queen e7 also doesn't present any real difficulties for black either, so it's not like it's a big problem. h3 was played by white, trying to get rid of this bishop. Bishop took. White, of course, recaptured with the bishop. You don't want to spoil your pawn structure by taking with the pawns and doubling these up. And now, after castles, white played a really big blunder in the move b4. And now, as I said at the beginning, here it's black to play and win. So hopefully you guys can solve this one, and I'll be back tomorrow with another easier puzzle. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.